What's good? It's Wood. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. We have Charles Oliveira, 31 wins, 8 losses, and 1 no contest, defending his UFC lightweight title against Dustin Poirier, 28 wins, 6 losses, and 1 no contest. This title fight is taking place at UFC 269 on Saturday, December 11th in Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, this is basically the closure that we've been looking for in the lightweight division to truly determine who the champion of, we'll call it the post-Khabib era, even though it was a short but dominant short era, who the true title holder is. And we've kind of had, not a round robin, but we've had some significant matches leading up to this culmination of Oliveira versus Poirier. Now, the interesting thing about this is that although Charles Oliveira is technically the UFC lightweight champion, Dustin Poirier, for his last couple fights, and certainly after his latest of back-to-back defeats, stoppage wins over Conor McGregor, although that second one was caused via injury, a kick-related injury, kick or block-related injury, injury nonetheless. But Dustin Poirier's pretty much been the uncrowned champion, the people's champion, if you will. It just so happens that when he had an opportunity, most likely to fight for the title after Khabib Nurmagomedov retired and then Dustin Poirier beat Conor McGregor in their rematch, he could have fought for the title. That's at least how this situation is understood, but instead opted to fight a third rubber match versus Conor McGregor and bypassed the opportunity to fight for the title. So since Poirier wanted to handle that business against McGregor, basically a higher paying super fight, the official title fight was battled between Charles Oliveira and Michael Chandler. A fight that, Charles Oliveira went tooth and nail. There were several moments in that first round that I thought that Michael Chandler was actually going to get the stoppage of Oliveira. Dropped him multiple times, almost had him finish on the ground to where, if it wasn't for Charles Oliveira just barely switching into another position and then switching into another position, the referee who's kind of on the fence, like, should I stop it? Should I not? Oliveira did just enough to get out of those could stop moments to survive that whole situation, make it out of the round, and then stopped Michael Chandler early in the second round to capture a title that, I would have never thought that Charles Oliveira would be fighting for the title. I mean, one thing that him and Dustin Poirier have in common is that they both entered the UFC super young. Like, if you think about it, isn't it crazy to imagine that Dustin Poirier, for all the experience that he has against top fighters, that Poirier is still only 32 years old. So he and Oliveira started in the UFC very young. Like, even if a fighter's going to enter MMA when they're like 18 to 20 years old, it usually takes them a while before they enter the UFC. But in some cases, you have guys that, damn near start their career, not officially, but start pretty early in their MMA career and enter the UFC at a super young age. So Oliveira is one of those guys who is showing a lot of potential as a prospect because of his super high level jiu-jitsu. Just his rangy build just looks like one of those kind of gangly fighters who can submit you in any number of ways. Just had an unpredictability to his offense as well. But he had suffered so many, losses early in his career to where it was like back and forth, kind of a win-some, lose-some situation, basically between 2010, 2011, through his most recent loss against Paul Felder, which was actually back in 2017. So he's been on a nice run for a while now. But yeah, it wasn't looking very promising for Oliveira. It looked like, well, maybe he's not going to fulfill the potential that we kind of had. Like, Eric Silva was one of those guys who was showing promise early. Then you see him get stopped a couple times, and then, that faith in the fighter starts to diminish. You start seeing them drop lower in the billing. Well, Charles Oliveira clawed his way the hell out of that hole after that loss to Paul Felder via TKO, where he got taken down, grounded and pounded. So you basically had him. He was having so much trouble making weight. He was trying to fight at 145 for like the longest time, missed weight several times, and then against Paul Felder, where again, he got grounded into a nub and just savagely beaten and stopped by the longtime contender, Paul Felder. Well, actually, that was after Charles Oliveira had just gone up to lightweight. So that was after he pretty much said, okay, I'm going to stop cutting all this weight to try to make feather 145. And then he actually got stopped by Felder at 155. But after that, he had a performance of the night against Clay Guida, submitting him in the first round. Then wins his next two fights against Jim Miller, and I forgot who he fought right before Jim Miller. But after that, it was David Tamer. He stopped him via submission. So he actually broke off 4 consecutive wins via submission. All the while, his stand-up game is drastically improving as well, to where he's actually damaging guys in the stand-up with his long reach, like a 74-inch reach or something crazy like that. By boxing standards, Terrence Crawford also has a 74-inch reach. By the way, Dustin Poirier has a long reach himself, 72 inches. But after that 4-fight win streak, he then beats Nick Lentz and then Jared Gordon. And then he has a headlining fight against Kevin Lee. This was the last fight before the pandemic kicked in. This is actually after they started canceling, NBA events and boxing events, but the UFC was the last entity to kind of hold on, and they had a fight night that headlined in Kevin Lee versus Oliveira, with Kevin Lee being the A-side fighter in that case. And Kevin Lee has some early success, but his ground game once again was exposed. He got caught in a guillotine versus Charles Oliveira. Another very impressive stoppage win. So at this point in this win streak, 4 in a row via submission, and then 2 knockout or TKOs. Those 2 came against Nick Lentz and Jared Gordon. Then he submits Kevin Lee, as I just mentioned. Then he fights Tony Ferguson, who in this division was basically not only the boogeyman, but he was the guy who we had been wanting, and they had been scheduling to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov 4 or 5 different times. Just one heartbreaking cancellation after another. But for some time, Tony Ferguson was seen to be the elite in the division. I mean, he held the interim title that was supposed to be squared away in a fight versus Khabib, where Tony Ferguson was actually being billed as the A-side before he tore his knee at an indoor press event prior to the fight with Khabib. That's where Khabib, as a replacement opponent, Al Iaquinta, stepped in, and Khabib beat him via 5-round unanimous decision. That's how Khabib earned his title. It was supposed to be Tony that was fighting against Khabib for the belt. Well, there was actually another time after that they were trying to reschedule now champion Khabib versus challenger Tony Ferguson. But then COVID kicked off. That fight ended up being scrapped. They ended up making Tony Ferguson versus Justin Gaethje, and Justin Gaethje actually got a 5th-round stoppage win over Tony Ferguson. So brutal beating that Tony Ferguson took. Well, his first fight after losing to Justin Gaethje, and that fight, by the way, is what earned Justin Gaethje a shot against Khabib, and he got submitted like Dustin Poirier did just about a year or 2 prior versus Khabib. But Tony Ferguson then fought Charles Oliveira, who was again fresh off his win against Kevin Lee, and Charles Oliveira pretty much surprisingly dominated Tony Ferguson and cruised to a 3-round decision win. So at this point, we're like, damn, yeah, Charles Oliveira, this isn't smoke and mirrors. This isn't he's getting good enough just to break your heart again with another loss. Now he's on a huge run. And that is what led to his title shot, his vacant title shot against Michael Chandler, where he again won via TKO in the 2nd round, becoming the champion. And now he's got to defend that belt against Dustin Poirier, who, again, if it wasn't for Khabib, Poirier would have probably been champion maybe for a couple years now. He has been outstanding for the past few years. I was talking about how they both started their UFC career, both Oliveira and Poirier, very early age-wise. Well, Poirier did have a few losses. I mean, he had a few wins in between those few losses, but he had lost to Chan Sung Jung, the Korean Zombie, Cub Swanson, Conor McGregor. This is between 2012 and 2014. But then he went on a 4-fight winning streak, and then he lost one more fight against Michael Johnson. Then he went on a tremendous run. By the way, he was actually knocked out against Michael Johnson, who, himself, it's weird. His career, he's beaten Tony Ferguson and Dustin Poirier, but he's lost to so many guys where it's really hard to gauge how good or underachieving Michael Johnson's career ended up being. But yeah, he had knocked out Dustin Poirier back in 2016. And then Poirier beats Jim Miller, gets a no contest because Eddie Alvarez need a downed opponent, that downed opponent being Dustin Poirier. They would run it back a few fights later. But then you look at some of his wins after that on the streak that he went on. He stops former lightweight champion Showtime Pettis. And then in an amazing fight, one of the best lightweight fights I've ever seen, Dustin Poirier fights Justin Gaethje. They're headlining a fight night, and this is one of the most brutal dogfights you could imagine. And it's so back and forth. Justin Gaethje's just ripping Poirier with leg kicks. They're catching each other up top. They're exchanging blood, exchanging blows. Just a true battle of attrition. And Dustin Poirier ends up getting a 4th round stoppage win over Justin Gaethje. And this is just before Gaethje would then go on to have a streak of his own, which led to his title shot. Well, after beating Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier then has a rematch with Eddie Alvarez, another former champion, another great fight, and he ends up TKOing Eddie Alvarez in the 2nd round. Follows that tremendous performance up with a fight against Max Holloway, who was dabbling up. He went up in weight from feather 145 to lightweight 155, fights Dustin Poirier, and Dustin Poirier wins a unanimous decision against Max Holloway. Pretty much outclasses him. He's a little too strong with his punching power, and he's such a well-rounded fighter too. You're going to be hard-pressed. If you're a slightly better jiu-jitsu specialist than Dustin Poirier, chances are he's a better striker than you. If you've got a slight edge in striking, which that's pretty hard to come by these days, then he's going to out-technique you elsewhere. Well, he wins that unanimous decision win against Max Holloway and then fights for the title against Khabib, where, by this point, can we just give everybody who lost to Khabib a mulligan as it pertains to how they are positioned against each other? For instance, Justin Gaethje. He lost to Poirier, went on a run, and then didn't lose again until losing to Khabib Nurmagomedov. Conor McGregor lost to Khabib Nurmagomedov. Dustin Poirier, after that Michael Johnson lost to Michael Johnson, he goes on that streak and doesn't lose again until he fights Khabib Nurmagomedov. So it's everybody should just be given a pass for that loss to Khabib, because everybody's doing it. Except for guys like Charles Oliveira, who weren't even on the championship radar at the time. But yeah, Dustin Poirier challenges for the title against Khabib, loses via 3rd round submission. And, when I was watching the fight, I thought that, Dustin Poirier hurt his leg or something, because he seemed like he took a weird step and then was just kind of favoring the knee to where his mobility seemed like it was compromised. I could be wrong about this, but that's how I interpreted it as I was watching the fight. And then Dustin Poirier has a near fight of the year type of fight against Dan Hooker, wins via unanimous decision. He had to pull out some late rounds to earn that win, because those first 2 rounds looked like, damn, it's anybody's guess who's going to come out on top here. But Dustin Poirier dug deep, as he does so many times, and ends up getting the decision win against Dan Hooker. Then he fights those back-to-back fights versus Conor McGregor, which, looking back, Conor McGregor could have fought anybody when he decided to have that rematch against Dustin Poirier. Not the 3rd fight against Poirier, but the first of those 2 most recent fights, where it's is he going to fight a 3rd fight with Nate Diaz? Is he going to fight this guy, that guy? He could have fought anybody, but he chose to fight Dustin Poirier after beating Cowboy Cerrone, after Conor beats Cowboy Cerrone. And at the time I was thinking, damn, that's a really ballsy move for Conor McGregor. And I wonder if he regrets making that decision now that he's coming off back-to-back TKO losses. Because he didn't have to fight Dustin, but he did. And that was about as credible an opponent to show people that you're still serious about this fighting stuff that Conor could have chosen. And it just didn't go well for Conor. But I won't forget the fact that he chose that opponent. So, hats off to him for that. But yeah, Dustin Poirier pulled off both of those wins via TKO. And now I'm looking at this Charles Oliveira versus Dustin Poirier matchup. And, I'm going to try to keep this one rather simple. I'm going to go with Dustin Poirier here. And I get that Charles Oliveira has been improving in so many different aspects of his game. And he's been silencing the doubters who, question his grit because of the way that he would seem to kind of fold under immense pressure, to where when the going got really, really tough, sometimes you would see him kind of pack it in and lose via submission or something, where you're what's up with this guy? And so again, he's been on this crazy winning streak. And it's like, maybe he isn't that guy who buckles under pressure anymore. And I believe that there's a ton of truth to that. I mean, in his title win against Michael Chandler, he had to endure that first round to where a lot of people would have been stopped in that situation, but he endured and he made it into the second round and then finished Michael Chandler in that second round. Well, now he's going against the Diamond where, what can you say about Dustin Poirier's level of grit? Here's the thing. If you're going to beat Dustin Poirier, you're going to have to clean knock him out. And I don't mean beat him up to a TKO, then Dustin Poirier falls onto his side and curls up. You're not going to get that type of win over Poirier, especially not this recent few years version of Poirier. So you're going to have to knock him clean out. Or against Khabib, Khabib just has his way. It's like he's like a virus that's creeping up your body, a visible virus that you just see your whole, and then all of a sudden it killed you. You're done. That's the type of, only that way, extraordinary thing you're gonna have to do to get Dustin Poirier out of there. Otherwise, pack a lunch, because he's really not going anywhere. Ask Dan Hooker, ask Eddie Alvarez. I mean, hell. In Dustin Poirier's fight against Showtime Pettis, this is back in 2017, that fight took place in so many different places. It was in the stand-up. Then, Showtime tried to sink a guillotine and kind of had his neck for a minute. But, he's not Khabib, even though, Showtime Pettis is a great submission expert when he chooses to be. That's how he won his title against Benson Henderson. But Dustin Poirier is so well adapted and can engage in a fight just about anywhere, on the ground, in the clinch, boxing range, kickboxing range. He could fight anytime, anywhere. And he put it so succinctly after his last fight with Conor McGregor. He said, at the end of the day, I'm just willing to suffer more. And I think that that's really the secret sauce, the intangible to Dustin Poirier that just makes it hard for me to pick Charles Oliveira, the champ, over Poirier. At the end of the day, I just think that he's willing to suffer more. And I think that if anybody breaks the other, it's going to be Dustin Poirier breaking Charles Oliveira. And I don't know whether it's going to take place in the stand-up or in the clinch or on the ground. But Dustin Poirier is just too damn durable. We just saw Justin Gaethje versus Michael Chandler. And I know Charles Oliveira stopped Michael Chandler. But what does it take to break Justin Gaethje? We saw Eddie Alvarez do it early in Gaethje's UFC portion of his career. But you really have to be willing to go to those dark, deep places to beat a Justin Gaethje. And that's exactly what Dustin Poirier was able to do. And that's why he pulled off the fourth round TKO win. But you look at that fight against Dan Hooker for Dustin Poirier. A lot of people would have wilted in that one. And I get it. Hooker's lost a couple times since. And he looked a lot like a Khabib victim when he lost to Islam in his very last fight. But again, Dustin Poirier, you're going to have to either knock him out or just be that snake of a virus and stop him via submission that way. Anything other than that, I don't see Dustin Poirier getting stopped, and I don't see Charles Oliveira controlling the fight to the point where he wins via 5-round decision. You mean to tell me that he's going to control or at least get the better of Dustin Poirier over the course of 25 minutes? I'm sorry, Dustin Poirier is physically strong, so I don't see him just getting controlled in the ground game. I feel like bodily-wise, he's more durable to where as they're exchanging punches and kicks in the stand-up, again, if somebody breaks, it's not going to be Dustin. And the technique in his boxing has cleaned up so much over the years to where he's a chess player in a lot of ways. He will drop you and stop you, but he's thinking 2-3 steps ahead, and he throws that left hook at the end of a long combination. So does Charles Oliveira, by the way. That's the way he was able to drop Michael Chandler in the beginning of their second round before stopping him. It was that left hook at the end of an exchange. But there are so many facets, the leg kicks, the calf kicks, and I know that Charles Oliveira is vastly improved in his stand-up as well. So if they're both technically sound and they're both deadly with the strikes, I think it comes down to who is going to be able to break the other. And I rarely put it in these terms, but especially in championship fights. But I think that one uniquely applies here. And I'm going with the diamond via TKO stoppage, like in the middle rounds. I think that Dustin Poirier is going to finally be crowned the official lightweight champion of the UFC. But yeah, let me know how you see this one playing out. I can't wait. But it will finally kind of clean up the muddy waters of the lightweight division post, Conor's inactivity because, after he fought Khabib, he was inactive for so long and Khabib was so dominant for those next couple fights and then retired. So we'll truly get some clarity in terms of what's what. I do think that the next in line after Oliveira versus Poirier should probably be Justin Gaethje competing for the title because his two last losses were, again, that loss to Dustin Poirier like 3.5 years ago and then against Khabib. So, again, not too many people are beating Justin Gaethje these days. But I get that there's also an argument to be made for Islam. Like, I'm sure he's going to be competing for the title in the not too distant future. But yeah, the lightweight division, we've had a lot of churn. It was long set and thought to be the best division in the UFC because of how top heavy that top 7, top 8 were. Well, now there's been some churn in the division where Khabib retired and Tony Ferguson and Conor McGregor don't appear to be what they used to be. But, we still have a prime Dustin Poirier, although I wonder how much left he has in the tank. He's been doing this for so long and he's has so many tough fights. He hasn't been wearing it. He's not a shot fighter by any measure. He's never been better in my opinion, but he's just been through so much and you could tell he just wants a couple money fights, meaningful fights. Maybe he goes up a division and sees if he could become champ or something like that. But I don't see Dustin Poirier sticking around too long just to fight the next up, then the next up. I don't see that in Dustin Poirier's future. But yeah, let me know who you think's gonna win this fight and how you see the next, we'll say, year to 2 years of the lightweight division playing out. Please leave your comments in the comments, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.